Hi, my name is Dustin Wells, and I'm the CEO of HeadSpring and co-founder of Workify. And we're excited to have you all join us today for a session that we have titled Leading with Purpose. This is a part of a three-part series, and this is our second part. The first one was Leading with Action. And one of the key takeaways was around awareness and action and how to bring effective change by looking at those through this matrix view, which was pretty interesting and a new way of thinking about that. And today we have two really great resources with us about leading with purpose. I want to just set the frame that this is not an interview necessarily, although I definitely have some things prepared to help start the dialogue, but it's really a conversation. And so I want to make sure that our guests are free to ask each other questions, ask me questions as well. But also we want to encourage anyone listening to also ask questions because while you may not be able to ask verbally, I will be looking at your questions via the webinar platform, and I want to make sure that your questions are answered or things and topics that are on your mind or things that we can dive into deeper, because this is really a contribution to the community and to like-minded leaders to make sure that we're sharing what we're seeing, but we also understand that we're not the only experts here and that we have a lot of experts on the phone as well that may be interested in sharing as well. So with that said, I'm going to introduce our two guests who you can see on the screen here. But our first guest is an expert energizer and integrator, and she is currently the executive director of the Small Giants community. And I'll let her tell you about that community. But what's unique and significant about that community is that they have a unique partnership with Forbes, where they get to recognize in partnership with Forbes the small giants of each year, and they recognize 25 different companies that are purpose-driven. And so I'm excited to hear your perspective, Hemsa, and then we have with us Rob as well, who's the CEO of Image One. He's an author, a speaker, and also a regular contributor to Forbes. He is also a leader of an organization that's been recognized as a best place to work many years running, and so has a great experience from the field as well. He also turned out to be a member of the Small Giants community that Hemsa leads. So welcome, Hemsa and Rob. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. What an honor.
Yeah, well, it's such an important topic today, and I'd love to just hear, Hemsa, I'll start with you. Just why is this so important? And if you can weave that in with why you do what you do and what the Small Giants community is all about, I think that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Dustin. Maybe I'll share how the community got started and what it's about. So the community was born out of a book called Small Giants, written by Bo Burlingham. And the tagline of the book is companies that choose to be great instead of big. So they were companies that he sort of profiled that truly prioritize purpose, people, culture, community, with the notion that if these organizations prioritize those things, that they would be profitable and they would grow and scale. So that was sort of the purpose of these organizations. So we started the community about 10 years ago, really to bring these stories to surface, to understand why these leaders practice business this way and what's so special about these organizations. And then it's grown into a community of like-minded leaders, purpose-driven leaders, and really a focus on sharing best practices. So the idea is that this all sounds really wonderful in theory, but how do you bring it to business? How do you practice it? What does it mean to lead with purpose? And so we focus a lot on sharing best practices with a variety of leaders in an organization. So it could be a founder or CEO or an emerging leader. So that's sort of the background and the story of Small Giants.
Well, so why take the executive director role there? Like, what is their personal passion around this, and why is this important to you?
Yeah. So maybe because I worked in a position prior where there was a really wonderful culture and there was a really sort of great energy to this organization and a wonderful purpose. And so I was really attracted to that initially, not knowing kind of how that all played out in an organization, but I became a part of it. And then when things started to sort of shift and when the company wasn't truly sort of practicing the values and the purpose, I realized the importance of that and the importance of not just articulating, but truly practicing the purpose, the values, the vision, and organization, and ensuring that everyone who's a part of a company is really tied and aligned to that and what happens when they're not and how that plays out. And so when I left that sort of organization, I did a lot of work around again, purpose and cultures and wanting to be part of something like that. And Rob Dubé, who's on the call, introduced me to the Small Giants community and thought that could be a really, sort of an interesting opportunity. And I thought, wow, I could not just work with one organization by focusing on their culture and purpose. I can really, truly have, influence and impact, not just hundreds, but thousands. And so that's how I got to the community. And that's why I was excited about the role.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate, and that's what I'm really excited to have your perspective here today, is because you're representing the views of hundreds of different purpose-driven leaders, and you're able to aggregate that into maybe trends or things that we can take away. And I definitely want to get to more about what does practicing purpose mean. But before I do, Rob, you joined us, and it was kind of at HIMSA's recommendation just to get another voice in the room from the community that's practicing this. But why is this a passion for you, or why is leading with purpose even interesting for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for what you're doing to have this kind of conversation. It's an important one. And I think that many years, I've been in business for 29 years. I started my company out of college, and I didn't really have the wisdom, so to speak, around how do you build a sustainable company where you truly and deeply care and genuinely care for your team members or your employees. And so how I would characterize the early part of our business was one that was more command and control.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, I started to learn that it didn't necessarily need to be that way. And the Small Giants community really brought that out to the forefront. In fact, empowering teams, where there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of empowerment around everything that you're doing within the organization, actually is a beautiful way to run an organization. And the Small Giants community has been really instrumental for me in learning all the different ways that you can go about doing that.
Yeah, it feels to me like we've had the rise of purpose, and today that's really obvious, and the rise of culture and engagement. Excuse me. But that's table stakes now, but it was not the case even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you talked about the Small Giants community being about 10 years old, and Rob, you talked about how you weren't always this way. And so it's important that companies, I think, understand that if you're not there, but you have a desire to get there, like that's the journey that we've all been on. And it's not that we came out with this kumbaya view of the world and that we wanted to all get along. I had to learn this too. I didn't start with this in mind as well. So, I mean, what either one of you really, what's the journey from going from a company that is command and control? You maybe know there's a different way, maybe a better way, I'll even say. But how do you make that shift?
So you want to take that one?
I was going to say, you have an awesome example of how that came about. If you want to start with that, and I'm happy to share a more sort of overview from the community.
Okay, cool. Well, from our standpoint, there were many circumstances that led to kind of where we are today. I think one of the first that I always think about is when we actually determined we needed core values, which I didn't really think was an important thing many years ago. And so that was kind of a starting point. But then I started to recognize that there were many companies that had core values, but they weren't really adhering to them or just really truly living them. And at a certain point, I was fortunate enough to come into contact with Bo Burlingham, who wrote the book Small Giants, and we got to know each other a little bit, and he offered up to a group of about 10 companies that he felt were sort of emerging small giants, kind of like they had the right mindset. Maybe they were doing some of the right things, but maybe not all of them. And he started taking us around the country to visit other small giant companies that were highlighted in the book. And oftentimes in those same cities, there were like 2 or 3 that he totally could have included in the book, but just didn't have room to do so. So for a large number of years, we did that. And later, as time went on, the Small Giants community actually, really, it went from Bo to really a Small Giants community trip. And, every time I went someplace, I could grab a nugget or 2 or 3 that I could come back and hopefully somewhat easily incorporate into our culture. And over 10 years, that's a lot of stuff, but it's not one trip and then it's all great. It takes time and patience.
Yeah, to me, it feels like a mindset first, though, from a leader. Would you agree with that, Himsa, or what would you add to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we've seen it in 2 different ways. We've seen it where the founder or CEO sort of has this in their head, and maybe they've practiced a little bit of it, but they come to us and their hope is that they want to see it in practice. They want to learn how to put systems and processes around it, and then get everybody in the organization to understand it, similar to what Rob was sharing. And so we have resources and sort of space. We've created a space to sort of support the founder and CEO in their journey with that. But then we've also seen it in a different way where this is a movement that's happening from the bottom up. And so it's employees sort of really asking for, like, why are we here? What's the purpose of this organization? What do we do here beyond, like, they may understand numbers and goals, but what's sort of the larger kind of picture? What's that guiding star? And so you see that movement kind of happening from the employees, from the teams, and then going up. And so we also have a forum to support that, which is to support the emerging leaders, so they each take responsibility for that. It doesn't just have to happen at the top. It's not just the founder and CEO's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And so how do you support your leaders at every level in the organization to own that, to practice that, to live up to the purpose, and then to question when you're no longer aligned with it?
Well, I'd love to encourage questions, especially perspective from anyone listening as well, because I think what you just hit on was interesting, that this is being requested and demanded maybe by employees. And I wonder if that's the experience that others are having. I don't, that's not what made this shift for me personally, but I have seen that now, and I think that you're absolutely on track. But I think the biggest risk is for lack of a better word, a capitalist-focused founder. And it's okay to be a capitalist and have purpose, by the way, which we might want to dive into. But a founder focused just on profit that realizes they need to really lead with purpose because it's good for the bottom line, which, by the way, it probably is. But if you're doing it for that reason, it lacks a certain kind of authenticity that's going to be really important in this being successful. Mm-hmm. And I know that, Himsa, you've talked a little bit with me about authenticity and leadership, and I'd love for you, and then Rob, for you to maybe elaborate a little bit from your perspective too on how we can authentically embrace purpose, right, to meet this demand and this need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's actually one of the qualities of being a small giant leader, this idea of authenticity, being authentic, being open, being transparent, being vulnerable. I feel like those are all sort of in the same bucket. And so the way we see that in the community, how we see it playing out is those leaders who are sort of, they could be really authentic about their purpose, meaning they truly believe that there's a bigger purpose to their business, not just to make money, but there's, beyond the service or product or making money, there's a bigger reason for that. So they could be really clear about that. Or they have a sense of it, but they don't know exactly how to articulate it. And so then they're authentic in that way by saying that, asking sort of the team to help them in bringing that to the surface. So we have a lot of leaders who involve the team in bringing the purpose to the surface. So they involve them in all kinds of activities and exercises to bring that to life. And then it's not, again, just the founder's voice, it's everybody's voice within the organization. And then when it's everybody's voice, then it's everybody's responsibility, and everybody feels like they were a part of that process. And so leaders can be really authentic about that by saying, look, we feel like the purpose is this, and we're having a hard time articulating that. We need your help, and sort of bringing that to the forefront. So that's, I think, how they can be, again, authentic or open about that process.
Rob, does that resonate with your journey at all?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, vulnerability is a key word that always sticks in my head because, over time, when for myself, maybe getting wired that I should have answers and not having the confidence to say I don't know, or to say you're way smarter on that than I am, or you figure it out. And I think many years ago when I was younger and we were starting off the company, that was sort of my mindset. I realized over time, I have certain things that I'm halfway decent at, but most of the things I'm not. And the team is so talented, and it's such a waste to not be vulnerable with them and give them that empowerment. Or I shouldn't even say give them. It's provide them the empowerment to just do what's right. And I found that anything that we've done over the years where we've come together as a team, and it's hard work and it takes time, has always yielded much grander results than one or two people who make a decision in the background and try to move forward with it. So yeah, those are some of the things that come to my mind in terms of my own experience.
Well, we did have a question come in, and thank you for sending this in, and want to encourage everyone to continue to be a part of that conversation if you're listening. But how can an organization create an atmosphere where members can safely keep the organization true to the purpose without compromising purpose for profit? And so this is really has a lot of depth as I'm kind of listening to that question. But both of y'all are kind of smiling with, so I'd like to hear what that's about, Rob, for you first, maybe, and then his.
Yeah, well, it's a journey. I always say that, and we're still on it. So I think at the core, it requires building a ton of trust through the team members learning that when they say how they feel, it's embraced versus looked down upon. And that the team members are truly heard and action is taken. And sometimes action doesn't mean you actually did something. It means you ensured that they were heard and you had an open dialogue about the direction, even if it's different than the direction that they maybe shared with us. So, that's one of the things that I think is most important, is that baseline of trust and building that up over years and years of showing up and doing what you say you're going to do.
Well, yeah, when I heard this question, it sounds to me like maybe leadership has stated core values or is leading with purpose, but at times maybe we need to be checked a little bit by the organization, right? Which I would totally agree with. But Himsa, you had a smile on your face too, as I read that. So what was that about for you?
So I think, this comes up as a topic in the community often. And I would say from a practical perspective, it's really maybe creating some, again, sort of practices around this. So encouraging the conversations to happen during one-on-ones and making sure that those happen regularly. So there's like a forum for that. And then same thing with, all hands on, I think a lot of companies do like company-wide meetings where that's a perfect opportunity to talk about purpose and alignment with purpose. And so creating that, so there's basically regular touch points and that you're practicing those often, even when it gets uncomfortable or sort of strange. And I think when you have that cadence, then people get a little bit more comfortable about sort of bringing these topics to the surface. But it's like Rob said, it's you have to really sort of create that trust and continue to build on that trust for people to utilize those opportunities and to bring those topics to the surface. But part of it is really kind of systematizing it. So there are like, those official opportunities to bring those topics.
Well, I mean, I'm noticing we're talking a lot about trust and authenticity, and all of these sound really, really good, and sometimes maybe not very accessible to certain leaders. I mean, are they just doomed to whatever that fate is? Is it possible to lead a company without purpose and have success? I mean, that would be an interesting maybe angle to look at.
I wonder what success means. I mean, I think it's different to everybody. So my answer from how I would see it through my lens is for sure. I mean, you can lead a company for whatever purposes that are important to you. Um, it just doesn't have to do with what we're talking about today, which is with purpose.
Yeah, so so why then have we chosen, right? I mean, leading with purpose can sound cliche a little bit. And core values definitely felt that way in the old days, although they're well more accepted now. In the old days being like 2010 for me, when we established ours back in that time frame. But I mean, I choose to lead with purpose because it is more fulfilling and meaningful. And it's about doing work with people that I want to relate to and that I care about, and it's about doing meaningful work. And so for me, it's very selfish maybe, right? It's meaningful to me to lead with purpose as I'm kind of thinking about it. But like, how does that strike either of you?
So take it.
Well, I was going to say that's for me, that's what motivates me and gets me up every day. So for me personally, money is not a motivator. It's important. So like if I'm thinking about the community and making sure it's self-sustaining, the profit part or the money part or the revenue part is important to do what we do, and it's important to be able to support leaders and organizations, but that's not why we exist. What gets me up every morning is the idea that we're influencing organizations, that we're creating really healthy environments, that these leaders are really being, they're recognizing who they are and they're supporting their communities, etc. So for me, the idea of working for a purposeful organization or company is what gets me up every morning. It's what gets me excited. It's what gets me motivated. And then even, like we're during this sort of crisis, there's a lot of organizations that are not making money. They're losing money. And so if money was the only motivator, well, what would keep them going, right? What would keep their employees going? So the idea of having this bigger purpose is really what's going to get us through this time period. So that's how I sort of see purpose as,
That's really interesting. Money is kind of ephemeral in a way, and purpose is everlasting, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think you started to hit on something interesting. And Rob, I don't know if you have an experience like this. I hope you don't. And Himsa, I know you might have a story around this, but during this time of crisis, we've had to make a lot of tough decisions as leaders of our company. And some of those have led to layoffs or furloughs or other really tough conversations. And that almost feels at odds with a culture that promotes, the well-being of people in a purpose-driven culture. So how do you maintain that balance between tough decisions like that, whether maybe they're coming up for people or they've already had to make them, with a sense of purpose and culture?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could take this one, Hamza.
Mm-hmm.
So my business, Image One, provides office services. We provide managed print services, which are multifunction printers, copiers, scanners, things of that nature, to primarily companies that have people going into an office. And that's not happening right now. So, very quickly, we were at the beginning of March, we were getting ready to make an acquisition. We were in full steam ahead growth mode. And, what feels like overnight, our business was cut in half. And so this has been the ultimate, from my standpoint, in how a culture shows up and how a purposeful organization shows up. And when you have all those processes, as Hemsa says, in place, or as Hemsa shared, you see how that all starts to work together. So in our case, we knew we had to make cost cuts very quickly, not just on the expense line, but also on the payroll line. Now, how do you do that? You could do layoffs or furloughs. You could all participate in together. Well, those are just the three things that come to the top of my mind, but what do I know? I'm not that smart. So go to the team. And since they understand the numbers, it's real easy. And I should say we practice open book finance. We were talking about that beforehand, before we went on live. And so our team members understand our numbers deeply. And so it was a real easy math problem with really challenging solutions that would come behind it. So we put it to the team. We set up committees. We took about 10 days and we asked them, how do you want to go about this? and they came up with the answers, and that was the path that we took.
Well, Rob,
Yeah.
like I wonder, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that must have been a really challenging time, and it probably still is. But if we're, talking about authenticity and vulnerability a little bit, I hope that's okay that I can ask this.
Yeah.
Like, how did you experience this personally? Because I can imagine it may have hit you really hard at first. Maybe it was a couple weeks of maybe feeling depressed. Like, honestly speaking, how did it hit you as a leader?
Well, my initial was, this just might be the way I'm personally wired, was let's get to work. Let's get on this right now. We don't have a minute to waste. So we were working, every day for a good solid 2 or 3 weeks on this, and trying to be prepared for what we felt was inevitably going to happen. So I think the most challenging time was the meeting where we came together and said, here's where we think things are going to shake out, what it's going to look like, how the amount of cost cutting that we'll need to do, and you could see, and it was all on Zoom, so you could see everybody. I was just looking at the screen and all the faces, and trying to figure out what was going on, which is impossible. And so then there was some quiet, and then there was some questions, and then where I really believe the Small Giants values came to life was a rally. And I mean, it was unbelievable. Everybody on our team, if you asked any of them about that meeting, they will say the same thing. It gives me goosebumps as I just talk about it now. Everybody was rallying. Let's do this. We can get through this together. Let's figure this out. Let's go do the committees, so on and so forth. And then this guy, he's a technician for our company, and he's such a really great soul, and he doesn't say a lot during meetings, but at the end he gave like this motivational speech from like a movie or something, like out of nowhere. And those are the moments where, I think, at least for myself, I look back and I say, all that foundation building, you never know when it's going to show up, and you don't even necessarily think about it, but it does. And I will say, after that meeting, I kind of stood up, and then I had to get down. I just had to sit down. I just started crying for a good 5 minutes. It was just so emotional, the whole thing. So now I just cry like every other day in the corner for a couple of minutes, but no, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's really meaningful to see this culture that's so important to you that you've nurtured it, but everyone's helped build. To Himsa's point earlier, it's this this is all of our job, and to see that manifest in a like locker room speech that brings everyone to tears is amazing. So thank you.
Sure.
What about you, Dustin? I'm curious about maybe how you've experienced what's been happening at your company and your team. Can you share maybe a little bit about you guys?
Yeah, for sure. And I haven't read this, but I wrote something to the company the first week about what I experienced emotionally just as a leader. And because and when I say the word as a leader, like I feel a responsibility to my team. And so I need to come from the right headspace in order to make sure that we can navigate through these things. Like that's my job. And so it's not coming from a place of ego, right, or anything like that. But I went through a lot of personal roller coasters first before I was able to really show up for the company. And it started with like denial, like this, I can't believe this is happening. Then I went to like the victim corner, like why is this happening to me? And finding little solace in that corner. And then shifted to okay, this is happening now, what are we going to do about it? And so those were like the 3 phases. And the 4th phase, which you and I have talked about a little bit offline, is the idea of like defense versus offense is a really good metaphor. And so then we started trying to really look at how do we play offense during this time in a really thoughtful way that still acknowledges what's happening around us and is sensitive to what's happening, but we're not going to be on our heels anymore. But I had to go through that journey on my own first before I could even get to that end state to say, okay, here's what I think we need to go do. And I think that, I mean, I don't know, I know from the team from comments here and there, but I do think that that had a big impact. One, sharing the personal journey, because I'm sure everyone was going through their version of that, and maybe they still are. But that's been really helpful for me, is just to share that personal journey, but then also just help me kind of process and clear my head so we could figure out what we're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen on the theme of offense versus defense, has that been a prevalent theme in the community at all?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we did this series called Stepping Up during this time, where we shared stories, and we featured Image One and Rob's team and company, sharing the different sort of perspectives and how leaders are going sort of through this time, and what they're, you know, this kind of like the journey that you went through, like how they're personally experiencing it, and then what they're sharing with the team. And I think what we're seeing a lot in the community is this idea that leaders are coming, you know, after sort of their processing time, they're showing their vulnerability during this time. They're, again, bringing the teams into the conversation. And then it's a really collaborative effort. And so even in cases where, you know, I can share an example, and it's actually a company in Detroit, that it's a marketing company that literally like went to almost zero revenue overnight. And the CEO thought, okay, what am I going to do? I have a responsibility for 20 some individuals, like, and so his thing was, okay, I'm going to, you know, talk to the team. They practice a form of financial transparency, not fully, like in Rob's case, but he sort of brought this to the team. And, you know, a couple of years prior, they had talked about this other business idea that was something completely different, which was actually like a grocery delivery business. And the team thought, what about that business plan? Like, can we dust that off? And can we do something with that? And 3 weeks from that conversation, 3 weeks later, they launched this business. The full team is you know, on board. He didn't have to lay anyone off, and they go to town, and it's this fully thriving business now, and is making more money than his original company, you know, in the first 6 months of the year. And so that was their way of sort of reacting or responding to the situation. And we're hearing a lot more stories of this type than, you know, ones that are like barely sort of surviving. So
yeah, I think what I'm hearing there is, as a leader, it feels like we're expected to have the answers. And I love that the common theme I'm hearing from both of you is that this is really a collaboration where we're working together, right? As coworkers, not as a company, but as a team. And I think that that's really great story to really illustrate that point.
Yeah, I think, Dustin, you know, you mentioned before responsibility. I feel like it's an honor and a responsibility. It seems like you have that same outlook. You know, we've been fortunate enough to somehow make our way into some position here. And so how can we show up and do things a little bit differently and provide a team, a group of other humans who on equal ground, how can we provide each other with a better life experience, quite frankly? I mean, we have a full life. It's not just come to work, get paid, go home, make money for the company, whatever the case might be. It's how can I go home and sit at the, you know, at dinner with my family and feel at peace and feel excited. And you know, as leaders, I think it's a really, it's an honor to be able to be in that position. When this happened, if I could add a couple things to what, you know, we got focused on. First, we got really clear with everybody about what we wanted to do for each other. Not, you know, the leadership do this for it was what do we want to do for each other? And so the first thing was to ensure the company was healthy, because if the company's not healthy, then none of us do well. So that's no good. So we all have to have our eye on that ball. The second thing is to keep us together. So how can we do that with a significant reduction in sales? And so that's something that we have to work on together. There's no maestro trying to, okay, this, that. And the next thing is, let's make sure we all together stay connected, ensure we're caring for each other, and keep each other informed. And so those 5 things have sort of been, consistent, like, hey, let's make sure that we're doing these things for each other. The next thing we did is said, okay, now we can sit around and we can watch this go on. We can wait around and see what happens, or we can do something. And so what are some things that we can do? And let's do some things and see how it works out. What are some ideas? So we did an ideation. We did what we called an idea lab, and some ideas came out of the idea lab. One of them, within 6 weeks, created a whole solutions product line for companies coming back to work. A temperature facial recognition unit that you put in your lobby or at the front of your coffee shop or whatnot. So it takes your temperature, scans your face, sees if you have a mask on. A hand sanitizing unit with digital signage on it, digital lockers so you don't have to touch, things of that nature. We put together a whole product line, and we, within 6 weeks, sourced it out, priced it out, yada, yada, all the stuff you got to do to start a business. The team did this and started making sales from it. And it's a rally for everybody. And it's, it's exciting and it brings energy. And I think when you have a small giants sort of philosophy, you can bring that out in times like these, and even probably in times not like these.
Yeah, well, and that's what's interesting. I think times like these, I feel like it's been easier for me to step up into a productive state. And when things are steady state and good, I think that's when I actually get lazy or maybe not as focused. It sounds like maybe you guys have seen some of that too.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny because for me, my reaction to this time was like, and maybe because of like my background. So I personally lived through 2 wars when I was much younger. And so I have this sort of attitude that like, okay, whatever it is, we can figure it out. It's not as big as the war. It's, and so when this whole thing hit, I was like, okay, well, we're going to stay home and we're going to have access to stuff and we still have electricity and internet. Like, okay, this is not bad. We can, so I kind of, it's actually, I love challenges. So it was actually, I reacted the same way, like, okay, it's a challenge, but we can problem solve it. We can figure it out kind of thing. Whereas, our team, and it's a smaller team, they were struggling a little bit more, and no fault of their own. I mean, they haven't lived through a war. Like, how can they figure out how to do this during this time? And so I actually had to check myself to think, okay, I have a different personal experience, which is allowing me to tackle this in a specific way versus others around me. And so just making sure that there's a balance there of how I behave and then how I support others around me, because they just don't have the same experience, and being there to support them.
Well, I just want to appreciate the, and maybe this is a barrier for leaders that desire to step into this kind of way of leading for some, but there's a high level of empathy and self-awareness that I'm sensing from both of you, and I think I have generally from purpose-driven leaders. And the other thing I want to appreciate is just there's absolutely no ego. It's not about us. It's not about what we're doing or the recognition side. And I guess if I had to think about a leader that really wanted to step into this way of showing up, I'm wondering, the first work would have to be probably personal work on just self-awareness and empathy. But I mean, what would you guys say to expand on that?
That's a great question, actually. I think that's a great starting point for your life journey, because you're not going to figure that out in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and probably not next year at this time, but you'll take little steps along the way that will be useful, and every day will be just a little bit better. And then at some point, it'll start to take greater hold.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a great starting point, though, Dustin.
Well, I'd love to shift a little bit, and we did have a question that is prompting this, and thank you for submitting that. Earlier in the very beginning, we talked about practicing purpose, And I'd love to dive into more about what that means. But let's start specifically where this question is hitting on is on the recruiting process. Like, how do you actually find people that are motivated by a purpose-driven organization over money and benefits? Because you're definitely attracting a different kind of person, maybe. And then, so I think that's kind of step one of the question. Step two is more explicitly around recruiting process or hiring process, like what were changes or what are things that you do in that process to help attract the right people?
Do you want to take that one, Hamza?
Yeah, I can, and you can of course add to what you guys do at Image One. I would say it probably starts with, just what you put out there in order to attract the right people. So very practical things like making sure that that's stated on your site, your materials. We've seen companies weave that into even the job description, that it's really frontline and center. And then even showcasing examples of what it means to live according to the company purpose. So a really good example of a company we've recently seen shows like what success means like, or what success is like in this position in the first month, 6 months, a year, etc. And their purpose and values were totally weaved into every section of that. So as opposed to just metrics or meeting sales goals or meeting numbers, for them it was much sort of showcasing the behaviors, and then making sure that that's not just in the written materials and on the site, but then it's also throughout the conversation in the recruiting process. So from the minute you connect with someone until and a lot of small giant companies, the recruiting process and the hiring process involves a lot of different people in the organization. It's not just, so there's like the HR, but then you go through the teams and the hiring. A lot of times the CEO is involved or the founder, and making sure that every person who's included in that process is really showcasing that. And again, that will only happen authentically if you're truly living the purpose and it's practiced in your organization versus, just a thing that you're following. So just, I think, making sure.
I love the way you said maybe sharing it through stories. I think that's what you were hitting on earlier a little bit. And we definitely could do a better job at that at my companies, but that's really insightful for me. Thank you.
We use a process to operate the company that some may be familiar with called EOS. And there's lots of processes that are out there, just happens to be the one that we use. And so it does start with evaluating your values and if they're in alignment. Do they get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it? So we're thinking about that as we're speaking with them. And we're looking for them to be curious about our match for them. So this is a two-way street, and it's not just, I don't know if you're good enough for us. Are we good enough for you, quite frankly?
Yeah.
And I think, money and benefits, it's pretty well, documented what certain roles go for, and the high end of that and the lower end of that, and different markets where that kind of lands, and benefits and things of that nature. So we just as an organization feel that it's important to be in the right zone. And if it needs to, if there's a financial aspect of that needs to be worked out, we'll work it out if it's the right person. Our purpose is to provide genuine care to everyone, every day, every time. So for us, we're looking for examples of that, both in our just basic interactions. How are they treating us, and how are we treating them, and how are they reacting to that? And what examples do they have maybe of how they do that? Because we're just looking for simple things in your day-to-day life, not this big thing you did at your last job or whatever. Yeah. We're looking for the way you made the barista's day, when you used to be able to go to a coffee shop. And just little actions each and every day that add up to something big over a period of time.
Well, I want to hit on something that just happened for me that's not obvious, but struck me, is your purpose has nothing to do with your business.
It has everything to do with our business.
Have you not told me what you did, like what your commercial business is? And you're right, that's a good correction. It has everything to do with your business, nothing to do with how you bill your customers, right? I guess you can.
It doesn't have to do with the widgets that we sell.
Right, and I found that really interesting. Like, how did you come about that?
Yeah, so I think that well, how we came about the purpose was a collaborative, was a collaboration, as it should be. And so it just, we had certain feedback that led us down a road to that's where it landed. That's the short story of it. But I think the cool thing about your business really being about that sort of thing is that it doesn't really matter if we sell managed print services, which we do and we love and we're the best at it. We are. We're really a great partner for anybody in that commoditized space. And so, but as we're recognizing, we can sell other things too. And so that's why I like to use the example of widgets, because you have the foundation built. And from there, you have a captive audience that trusts you, and it's earned trust.
Yeah.
And when you have that earned trust, if you're thoughtful about the products and services that you're bringing to the market, you can really do anything.
Yeah, that makes me think about the stories that a lot of us have heard, but that might be new for some of us, though. When you ask, what business are you really in, right? I'm not in the railroad business, I'm in the transportation business, right? Or Netflix is not a DVD company. If they were, they'd be out of business, right? They're a home entertainment company. And so there's a lot of Disney, what are they in the business of? Experiences, I think is what they say. And so I think you guys have really nailed it, it sounds like. But I wonder, Himsa, is that a common trend in your community, like purpose statements that don't have to do with the widgets?
Yeah, we oftentimes see purpose statements really focused on the people. So caring for people, providing an amazing experience for the people. And a lot of times the people are, not just their teams, but again, all this sort of stakeholders. So community members, customers, vendors, like sort of everybody they touch. So similar to image one. So we do see that often. Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
We'll actually be hitting on that hopefully next week once we get it all confirmed around the stakeholder model, which I think is what you're alluding to. And I don't want to necessarily cover that right now, but we did get another question that I do want to cover maybe for our last couple minutes. We talked a lot about the personal characteristics as a leader, and what is required if you want to become a leader that's leading with purpose. One of those is empathy, in my opinion. Self-awareness is a really big deal. But can you maybe comment on the role that compassion plays as a leader that's leading with purpose?
I'll start, Hafsa, and then you can take over. I think I love compassion, and I think it's very important. When I think about compassion, we talk about compassion actually at our company quite a bit. Oftentimes, it leads us down a road where there's maybe something that's not right, and so our heart goes out and we're compassionate around it. And so we believe and exhibit that value. Where genuine care comes in, and I might be just verging a little bit from that question, but I'm just comparing and contrasting, is that it's this ability to show up no matter what the circumstances, good, bad, or indifferent, and provide a level of love that is so unconditional. And that's really, what we're probably more focused on. And I think compassion is a subset of that. It ends up showing up when there are times where it needs to show up.
Yeah, thank you. Himsa, what would you add to that?
I was going to say my mind went to, I think I mentioned this earlier, this idea of caring for people in the totality of their lives, which is something that small giant leaders truly practice. So, caring, loving, supporting, those who are, again, in your company, whom you're sort of touching as part of your organization, and doing that regardless of sort of what the task at hand is. So whether it's good times, it's bad times, whether they are part of your organization, or even, something that we talk about, even if somebody has to leave your organization for whatever reason, that you're compassionate about that it's mindful, that you're caring in the process, because again, they're a human being, right? They're not just there to check off a service or do a task for you. And so that's sort of where my mind goes to when we think about small giants and how they display compassion and caring.
Yeah, that made me think about a book that recently got published called The $1 Trillion Coach. It's about Bill Campbell, who's a famous Silicon Valley coach. And the title speaks for itself. Did I say billion? It's a $1 trillion coach. I don't know if I said it right.
Yeah, trillion. Yep.
It's trillions, not billions, which is even more mind-numbing. But I remember being struck by that comment that he said that you're coaching the whole person. You're not coaching one aspect of the person, and you can't effectively coach someone or lead someone unless you have a fuller understanding. And that's really challenging, I think, especially at scale. I don't know, we have about 100 people or so, and I don't know, Rob, where you're at. I do know about HIMSS's group. It's almost more fun to be at a smaller company because you can have those relationships, but even at 100, it's really challenging to really have that personal connection with everyone.
Yeah, it is. It is. There are 1,000,001 little things that you can do to make a difference, and they're not hard. And and I'm sure you do many of them, Dustin. In fact, I'd love to hear any that you do. And I'll just share things like handwritten notes, videos. There's a platform called Loom. You can send videos on Loom like in 2 seconds. You can send simple emails if you have an internal platform like Yammer or something like that, Slack. There's so many ways to connect. It doesn't always have to be, this full on, which those are the best. I mean, obviously. And I'd love to hear what you guys do too, because I'd love to add to it.
Well, yeah, you said 1,000,001, so I want the list at some point. But for me, the biggest thing that I try to do consciously is really when I'm talking to someone, and it's a lot easier in a physical environment, is to really have my attention and focus be there with them on whatever we're talking about. And I hope that that's felt and seen. I think that's the most respect I can give anyone, is to really be there with them during that time versus thinking about my next meeting or whatever's going on next. And so that's the main thing that came to mind as you were sharing some of those things. I've tried handwritten notes, and I just can't. My handwriting sucks. I just can't get on it as much as I'd like. I did during this time reach out to every single person over Slack at the company over like a 3-day period, and just see how they're doing and understand how this is impacting them. And I think that was really meaningful for me, just to get to hear a different dialogue, because we weren't talking about work at all. None of us did, actually. Not one conversation went to work.
That's cool.
So that was really well. We're getting to a time, and that was our last question so far. I'm going to put you both on the spot, see if you want to leave us with any closing thoughts. And hence, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. This was so wonderful to spend time with you, Dustin, and obviously to have Rob here. He's a wonderful friend and mentor, and just a great inspiration, not just to me personally, but to other small giants. So, what I will just maybe leave with is to always think about and practice and live your purpose. So, and if you're sort of drifting from that, or if you're disconnecting from that, to really actively work on it, wherever you are, whether it's personally, professionally, to really just make sure that that's your guiding star.
Thanks.
Wow, I wish I had any, some sort of great wisdom statement. I don't, but I will say thank you for being here. And similarly to HIMSS, she's a great mentor, actually, to me, and a great friend. And Dustin, for you for inviting me, I have much gratitude to you and your team. Your team is like top notch. Everything's on it. And so I appreciate that very much. And, I think about genuine care. So all the time, how can we show up for each other in society, really, even beyond our businesses? And I think that at least makes any of the challenges that we're dealing with just a little bit better. It's not huge, but it's small, and it makes a big difference.
Well, I really appreciate you two being a thought partner for me in just thinking through this. I learned something every time I get to talk to leaders who are practicing this, and it's been really valuable for me. And I think I might encourage anyone that's interested in making that leap just to really start on the inner journey. And that's been effective for me on just personal awareness, personal empathy, understanding how I'm showing up has been the first step in making sure that we can really show up as our best. So with that said, I'd like to thank you both for being here and thank everyone for attending, and we will say goodbye. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.